This is Augusto, a thin boy in poor health with an inherited name. His great-uncle, Julius Caesar, was stabbed in the Senate. He left him his name and a list of enemies. Experienced generals laughed at him. A boy doesn't command legions. A mistake. That cost them their heads. He wasn't the best soldier, but he was the smartest. He used the fury of others as a weapon and the loyalty of the legions as a shield. He hunted down Caesar's murderers. Then he eliminated his own allies. Power is not divided, and when the dust had settled, and there was no one left to kill, he made his most ingenious move. He didn't shout, "I am king." He whispered, "I have restored the republic." A magnificent lie. He gave the Senate speeches, and the people bread and circuses. For himself, he kept the army, the treasury, and the power of life and death. He found Rome as a city of bricks and left it covered in marble. An architect, no doubt. But the great project wasn't the temples. It was the empire itself, a system so strong that it could survive almost anything. Almost. Because the power forged with such patience was about to fall into the hands of a complete lunatic. His name was Gaius. But as a child, in the legion's camp, his father dressed him up as a soldier. The men called him Caligula. Little Boots. An almost affectionate nickname. No one imagined what a monster the Boot would one day be. At first, Rome breathed a sigh of relief. The son of the beloved General Germanicus. He burned tax records, freed prisoners. The people adored him, until a mysterious fever almost took him. He survived, but the fever seems to have burned his sanity along with it. He declared himself a living god. He forced senators to kiss his feet. He emptied the treasury into giant party boats and luxuries that would make a pharaoh blush. And then came the final insult to Rome's honor, the horse incitatus. He dressed him in purple robes, gave him a palace, and planned to appoint him consul, the highest office for an animal. It was his way of saying, "You're all worth less than my horse." His greatest military campaign? A war against the sea. He ordered them to attack the water with swords, and then to collect shells as treasures of victory. We soldiers live for honor. That was worse than death. 4 years. That's how long the joke lasted. The Praetorian Guard, his own bodyguards, grew tired of the spectacle. They surrounded him in a corridor and paid him with 30 stab wounds. They killed the mad god, and in the chaos that followed, they looked for a new emperor. They found one, hiding behind a curtain. Behind the curtain, trembling, was Claudius, the uncle of the emperor who had just been killed. The imperial family had always treated him as a disgrace. He had a limp, a stutter, and was half-deaf. A mistake of nature, they said. Perfect to be ignored. Perfect for survival. The guard had a problem. They had killed the emperor. They needed another one, and fast, to justify their betrayal. So, in desperation, they took the fool. The Senate despised him. Rome expected a disaster, a puppet in the hands of the soldiers. But the unlikely happened. The man who had spent his life pretending to be an idiot in order to survive was actually a scholar. He ruled. He fixed the laws. He built 2 aqueducts that still serve the city today. He built a new port in Ostia so that Rome's belly would always be full. And then, the greatest absurdity of all. The emperor, who could barely walk in a straight line, did what not even the great Julius Caesar could do. He ordered an invasion and conquered Britannia. He gave himself a triumph and the respect of the legions. Not bad for the family idiot, but a man can be a genius at running an empire and a complete fool at running his own household. His last wife, Agrippina, was ambitious. She convinced him to adopt her son, a talented and spoiled boy, a young man called Nero. With his heir guaranteed, Claudius was no longer useful. He died soon after. The official story says it was of natural causes. The story told by the soldiers involves a plate of poisoned mushrooms. The unlikely emperor, who survived tyrants and conquered distant lands, was killed by his own blind trust. By adopting Nero, he didn't just sign his own death warrant, he signed that of thousands. Power now belonged to Nero, a 16-year-old boy who preferred poems to military parades and the lyre to the sword. For the first 5 years, He was a good student, an emperor of facade, guided by his tutor, the philosopher Seneca. Rome prospered, but power is a slow poison, and the stage an irresistible temptation. Nero didn't want to rule. He wanted to be loved, adored, a god of performance. To be the only star, he cleaned out the cast. He murdered his own mother, the woman who put him on the throne. He forced Seneca to commit suicide. The show was his alone now. Then, in the year 64, Rome burned. Legend has it that he played his lyre while the city burned to the ground. A rumor, perhaps. But the truth is even worse. He took advantage of the wasteland. Instead of thousands of houses, he built himself a palace, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a monument to his ego, built on the misery of his people. Of course, someone had to take the blame for the fire. He chose the Christians, a new and strange sect, perfect scapegoats for his arena. But an empire is not a theater. You don't command legions with songs. The generals on the frontiers grew tired of the circus and marched on Rome. The Senate, smelling blood, declared him a public enemy. The artist fled. With no audience and no applause, he took his own life. His last words? "Which artist dies with me?" Augustus's dynasty, which began with a political genius, ended with a narcissistic actor. Chaos was back. And the throne was empty, waiting for a real soldier to take it. With Nero dead, Augustus's lineage turned to dust. The throne became a prize to be taken by the sword. It was the year of the 4 emperors, generals and mediocre politicians killing each other in Rome, while the empire bled out on the frontiers. Far from that mess, in the province of Judea, a veteran general was crushing a rebellion. His name, Vespasian. He wasn't a blue-blooded nobleman. He was a career soldier, the son of tax collectors, a practical man with a coarse humor, his hands dirty with dust and blood. The legions of the East grew tired of Rome's peacocks, and they did what armies do best. They chose their own leader. He took Rome. What did he find? An empty treasury and a morally bankrupt city. The first task of a good commander is to restock. He taxed everything. When his son complained about a tax on urine in public toilets, he took out a coin and said, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't smell. And with the gold and slaves looted from the temple in Jerusalem, he began his greatest project. On the exact spot where the lake of Nero's palace stood, he gave the land back to the people. And he built the Flavian amphitheater for them, what the world today calls the Colosseum. He wasn't a genius or a god. He was a soldier who knew how to do math. He found Rome at civil war and left it in peace with money in the vault. He created a new dynasty, the Flavians, and left stone foundations, so solid that Rome wouldn't just recover. It would prepare to achieve its maximum glory, its most brutal expansion. Vespasian's foundations were strong, so strong that they supported the greatest weight Rome has ever placed on the world. This is Trajan, the first emperor born outside Italy, a soldier from the province of Hispania. He came to power not because of family intrigues, but because he was the best general Rome had. His philosophy was that of a legionnaire. The best defense is a good offense. And Rome's enemies would learn this the hard way. He conquered Dacia, bringing Rome a mountain of gold that financed the empire for a generation. And so that no one would forget how he did it, he had the whole story carved on a marble column. But he didn't stop. He pushed the frontiers further east, as far as any Roman general had ever dreamed of going. He reached the Persian Gulf. With so much wealth, he could have built a palace for himself. Instead, he built one for the people, Trajan's Forum, markets, libraries, squares. He gave Rome a new heart. The Senate gave him a title it had never given to anyone else, Optimus Princeps, the best emperor. For 200 years, every new emperor was crowned with the same prayer. May you be luckier than Augustus, and better than Trajan. He was the peak, the apex of the mountain. The moment when Rome looked at the map and saw nothing else worth taking by force. But such a vast empire is a hungry monster, difficult to feed and impossible to monitor. Its borders are too long. The next emperor would look at this same map, not with pride, but with anxiety. And he would decide that the age of the sword was over. It was time to use the shovel. It was time to build walls. Conquering is the easy part. The glory of victory is cheap. Keeping what you've conquered, that's the real, never-ending war of a ruler. Trajan's successor was Hadrian, also a Spaniard, but a different kind of soldier. He was obsessed with discipline, architecture, and Greek culture. His first decision in power came as a shock to the generals. He looked at Trajan's new conquests in the east and abandoned them. He ordered the legions to retreat. For a legionary, retreat is bitter as gall. But for an emperor, shorter borders are easier to defend. He spent more than half of his reign traveling, not to conquer, but to inspect. He visited every province from end to end, and everywhere he built forts, roads, cities, and, of course, walls. In Rome, his great work was the reconstruction of the Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, with a concrete dome that even today engineers scratch their heads to understand. Engineering as a demonstration of power. He was a complex man, a cold administrator who fell madly in love with a young Greek, Antinous. When the boy drowned in the Nile, a devastated Hadrian declared him a god and founded a city in his name. Hadrian didn't give Rome new victories to celebrate. He gave it something more lasting: order. He gave the empire clear boundaries and strong defenses. He exchanged passing glory for lasting peace. And the peace, the Pax Romana, lasted. A long and prosperous peace. But peace comes at a dangerous price. It makes you forget how to fight. And beyond the walls, at the edge of the civilized world, a storm was brewing. The last of the good emperors would not inherit peace. He would inherit total war. The storm had arrived. Decades of peace had made the borders soft, and the legions complacent. And the barbarians, always hungry, came to collect the bill. And the man chosen to face the flood was not a conqueror. He was a philosopher, Marcus Aurelius, a follower of Stoicism, a man who preferred the library to headquarters. He never wanted power. He just wanted to understand how to be a good man. Fate, ironically, gave him the exact opposite of what he wanted. His reign was a succession of disasters. War in the east, a terrible plague brought by the troops, which decimated the population. And, worst of all, the Marcoman Wars, almost 20 years of carnage on the Danube border. A war not for glory, but for the survival of Rome. And in the midst of this hell of mud and blood, he was writing. In his campaign tent, at night. He didn't write orders of battle. He wrote for himself. Notes on how to stay calm, how to do his duty, how to face death without fear. He was the philosopher king that Plato dreamed of. An ideal come true. And for almost 2 decades, he single-handedly held civilization at sword point. But the wisest man in Rome made the most foolish mistake of a father. He broke the golden tradition of the previous century, adopting the best man for the job. He appointed his own son. Comfortable. A vain narcissist, more interested in fighting as a gladiator than in governing. An act of love that was an act of betrayal towards the empire. Marcus Aurelius died where he lived, on the battlefield, defending the frontier. The last of the 5 good emperors. His death was not the end of a man. It was the end of an era. The dam he had held up for so long didn't just crack, it exploded. The dam burst. What followed was the crisis of the 3rd century, 50 years of pure hell. More than 20 emperors in 50 years. Most of them traitorous generals who lasted a few months before being assassinated by their own men. The empire was cannibalizing itself, until one soldier said, "Enough." Diocletian, the son of a freed slave from Dalmatia. He rose through the ranks with spear and cunning. He didn't look at Rome and see glory. He saw an open, festering wound. His diagnosis as a commander was brutal. The empire was too big. The job was too heavy for one man. Augustus's system was dead and buried. His solution? Radical. He took the empire and cut it into 4 pieces. 2 senior emperors, the Augusti, 2 juniors, the Caesars. 4 capitals. 4 armies, 4 fronts. A war machine and administration to save the Roman world from itself. He also put an end to the farce of the first citizen. He declared himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He demanded to be worshipped. And to reinforce unity, he launched the most savage persecution Christians had ever seen. For 20 years, he ruled with the discipline of a centurion and the will of a god. He rebuilt the army, the economy, and the state. And then, when the job was done, he did the unthinkable. He retired, voluntarily. He went to his giant palace on the coast to, in his words, plant cabbages. A god turned gardener. But his perfect machine had one fatal flaw: human ambition. As soon as he left, his successors began fighting for the ultimate prize: total control. The civil war he stopped came back in full force. And in the midst of the carnage, a general would look to the sky and see a new symbol, promising victory in the name of a new god. Diocletian's machine broke down. Civil war returned, more savage than ever. But this time, the fight wasn't just for power. It was for the soul of the empire. Constantine, another tough general from the frontier, fighting for power. As he marched on Rome for the decisive battle, legend has it that he looked up into the sky and saw a sign, with a promise: in hoc signo vinces. In this sign you will win. Divine vision or the propaganda of a military genius? For a soldier, it doesn't matter. It worked. He crushed his rival at the Battle of Ponte Milvia. And the god of the Christians, yesterday a persecuted sect, became the god of the emperor. He didn't ban the old gods. He was smarter. With the Edict of Milan, he simply made Christianity legal. He ended the persecutions. The power of the state now supported the cross. But old Rome, with its pagan temples and stubborn senators, was no place for his revolution. He needed a new beginning, a new Rome. He rebuilt it in the most fortified and magnificent city in the world, Constantinople, the new capital, at the center of the future. He ruled as the champion of the faith for more than 30 years. But he was only baptized on his deathbed. A pragmatic soldier to the end, wiping away the sins of a lifetime at the last minute. Constantine didn't save the Western Roman Empire. It was already doomed to fall. What he did was greater. He took the fabric of Rome, the soul of Christianity, and forged the future, the Byzantine Empire, which would last another 1,000 years. He wasn't the last Roman emperor. He was the first of a new world, the man who looked at a dying empire and pointed the way to the Middle Ages.
Hannibal Barca, of Carthage. The legend says his father made him swear on an altar when he was still a boy an eternal hatred for Rome, a promise he took to his grave. He did not attack us by the obvious route. He did the unthinkable. He marched his army, infantry, cavalry, and dozens of war elephants from Spain through Gaul and over the wall of ice and stone of the Alps. He fell upon Italy like a thunderbolt from a cloudless sky, and for 15 years he was invincible. But his masterpiece of carnage was at Cannae. He let his center give way, luring us into a trap